The Committee of the Whole will come back to order. Today marks the start of the 2014 to 2015 biennial budget process for Cuyahoga County. This is probably a bit extra, but I'm going to ask the clerk, has anyone signed in for public comment on this part here?
Mr. Chairman, no one has signed in to speak.
Okay. And I would ask the clerk to please read the resolution.
Well, the topic of today's discussion, I don't have the resolution as part of this agenda since it was not actually referred.
That's correct.
Would you like me to read the topic?
Please read what's in the agenda.
Thank you, sir. Cuyahoga County Financial Overview and Outlook in preparation for the 2014-2015 biennial budget process.
Thank you very much. Our intention is to pass a budget resolution out of Committee of the Whole on November 18th or November 21st. It would then have second reading in Council on November 26th and final passage on December 10th. There are copies of the budget hearing schedule on the side table for anyone who wants one, and the schedule is also on the Council's website. The first two sessions, today and tomorrow, are overviews designed to give Council and the public a big picture look at the proposed 2014 to 2015 budget. Today's hearing will focus on the county's financial condition as we go into this budget process, and tomorrow's hearing will focus on the key features of the budget itself. Time will be at a premium, and if there is no objection, I'd like to use the following process for today's and tomorrow's hearings. Director Parks and Rubino will complete their presentations before we start questions. On each day, I'll start by assuming that everyone has questions and just go down the row one by one, starting with Councilman Greenspan today and Councilwoman Simon tomorrow. Questions will be limited to 3 per person in the first round. After the first round is completed, I'll ask who has additional questions and create a speaking order. If several have additional questions, we'll continue with the 3-question rule, but if only a few have additional questions, the 3-question rule will be dispensed with at that point. Today we'll have question rounds until all questions have been asked. Tomorrow we will do as many rounds as we can before we have to break for the council meeting. If we don't finish all of the questions tomorrow, I will provide time for more questions on the overviews at Thursday's session. Follow-up on the financial overview may be asked tomorrow as part of the general question and answer time. Are there any questions or concerns about the process?
Mr. Chair, just wondering, when we do get into the meat of it and all the departments will start to give us their budget overview, will the presentation that they'll give before us, is it going to be on the cuts to their budget the way they see now? Or, especially when we're talking about the Health and Human Services Department, or will it reflect that this levy may pass or whatever? So I want to understand.
Well, we all hope that the very much needed Health and Human Services levy is going to pass, and we're not going to hear the Health and Human Services departments until November 7th, which is 2 days after the election. So hopefully those presentations will at least partly incorporate the election results, but the budget was written based on the revenues we now know of. So it's probably going to be kind of a blend, because I don't think 2 days will be enough to fully incorporate the levy passage, if that in fact occurs.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. And just to echo that concern, Director Rubino mentioned in your committee that there was roughly $25 million, that was just a rough number, that that as they went through the human service departments, they reduced those budgets to balance the budget by in the neighborhood of $25 million. I would like to know the exact dollar amount to the penny that they did reduce those budgets. My concern is if they've brought, without any consideration to what Health and Human Service levy dollars we get, if those dollars have been taken out of the human service budgets all across those departments, if we simply replug our newly gained HHS dollars into these, what I'm calling artificial holes created to balance the budget, in a sense, it makes every door we knocked on, every speaking bureau we attended, almost, irrelevant by simply plugging a hole that has been made, I'm going to say artificially. I don't know if this is the standard time to bring budgets in line, but my first thought would be to replace those dollars based on knowing that we have levy dollars so that we can maximize what we have gained instead of just plugging a hole that's made. So that's my concern if I'm accurate in what it appears to be happening.
Mr. Chairman,
So that's my comment on that.
if I'm next, I'm not sure, I wasn't watching.
You're next.
Oh, okay. I just want to make a suggestion, and that's all it is. I appreciate all the work that you've done here and the way that you've laid all this out, but I'm listening to what my colleagues are saying, and there's obviously we have this issue of timing that's awkward for the administration and for us, and we certainly don't want to not be efficient in terms of how we use our time or what it is how we analyze the budget. And I don't know, I know you've got reasons for what you did, so I know that for sure, because I know you that well. But is it possible that we could do HH on the 12th of November instead of the prosecutor, and do the prosecutor on the 7th? That would at least give the administration and us more time to think. I expect I know at least I'll be pretty exhausted on the 6th. I'll be okay on the 7th, but I don't know if I'll, it's something to consider. I'm not suggesting that you'd make a decision. I'm just suggesting that, there may be a possibility of there being a little more time here to reconsider Health and Human Services, even though we expect the levy to be successful. We sure don't know that it will be. Nobody knows. And so it's just a suggestion.
I'm certainly willing to consider that. Note that we only have 2 hours scheduled on the 12th. We would have to work with other committees to clear some additional time if we're going to hear the Health and Human Services departments on that day. But we can certainly consider that as an option.
Okay.
Okay. And to respond to what Councilwoman Conwell and Councilman Jones said, we received testimony that there was approximately a $24 million discrepancy between revenues and expenses on the Health and Human Services side that we've been operating under, and I'm just receiving the spreadsheets now, so I don't know the extent to which. My guess is that the proposed budget does not totally close that gap, and that partly we would continue to use reserves if the levy is not approved, and so we're going to have to work out what the right levels of expenditure should be, depending on what occurs on November 5th, and it'll be an open question if the levy passes as to what items should be restored, what new additional things should be done, if any, and so these remain open questions at this point.
Just want to let you know, Chair, that for November 12th, my my committee, as only 2 committees for that day, be willing to not have anything that day if Councilman Brady's question needs to happen.
Okay. So, any other questions on the process? Okay, then we will take another look at November 7th versus November 12th, and I will ask Directors Parks and Rubino to come forward at this point and make the opening presentation on the county's financial situation as we enter the budget process.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of the committee. Just to give you how we're going to kind of work through this, when I spoke to Councilman Miller, what he did mention is that he wanted to hear about the financial position of the county, revenues, and things that affect our spending levels. So what I will be doing is coming from a macro level, talking about the overall region and some of the things that affect the budget and our spending and some of the initiatives and some of the revenues that we'll be relating to. And then Director Rubino will come up and talk in more detail about the actual budget related directly to the county. So first and foremost, I just want to talk about the financial strength of the county. Last week I had an opportunity, I was in the financial capital of the world, New York, arguably it goes between New York and London. Yes, sir.
Before you start, do you have a prepared presentation that you're going to be able to send us so that we don't have to be busily scribbling notes?
I do not have a prepared presentation.
Okay, well then we got to take notes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and one of the things that came up from some... It was actually, that's a very interesting question. I spoke on behalf of the county. I was fortunate enough to speak at the Yale Club. And because I was a speaker, they actually reimbursed us for some of the cost of the trip. And it was based on our tax lien process. And one of the things that happened is I was fortunate enough to meet a very well-heeled gentleman who grew up here in Shaker Heights. And one of the things he mentioned is that Cuyahoga County and Cleveland, one of their challenges is how we market ourselves. He talked about the great things that go on here in Cuyahoga County and how he's been across the world. He comes back and he thinks that we have one of the cleanest downtowns in the entire country for a major metropolitan city and that type of thing. So I wanted to applaud and salute this council for your partnership as we go through this budget process, because given some of the challenges that we face, most notably some of the cuts from the state budget, where we lost at least $17 million on an annual basis in our funding, we're still able to have a very strong budget. We have this year the budget is somewhat flat, and we still maintain a very strong level of reserves. Projected for 2013, we're looking at a general fund reserve of 37.9%, which is a very high balance, unattained by most jurisdictions, especially, again, given the cuts that were given to the local government funds. In our HHS reserve, we have 13.8% projected reserve. So that's very strong given, again, the cuts and the challenges of the revenues over the last couple of years. So what I'm just going to present to you is just some of the processes, and from the integrity of the process of the budget, some of the efficiencies that we've realized that affect our spending, some of the revenues and how they're derived and how we project them to go out in the future, and then some of the investments that we're making that strategically will increase and help those revenues moving forward. As we talk about the budget process, one of the tenets is that we use the resources in a manner that produces measurable outcomes. So we budget very strategically. We allocate resources to strategic initiatives, and then we contend with the lower levels of funding from the state and other entities. And I want to underscore that again, in our budget process, there was many municipalities and counties who had to go out for additional taxes. This is something that we didn't do. We utilized the resources that we had and still adopted some strong initiatives, which I'll talk about later. In addition to that strong budgeting process, we offer a very transparent fiscal department. And to highlight our skills, our budget department was given the GFOA Budget Award in for our last budget. So all of this comes together to produce a great product and a good budget given the situations. So some of the efficiencies that we've gained come in, and you spoke about that in your last discussion, are property consolidations. So one of the initiatives and some of the efficiencies that are gained are going through and evaluating all the properties and pulling it together and recognizing savings in those facilities by cutting down, selling some, and hopefully bringing in some revenues. One of the other consolidations is one of the regional approaches that we've taken. In Cuyahoga County, we have 45 what they call public safety answering points, or they call them PSAPs. And we are consolidating that from 45, and the goal is anywhere, I believe, from 4 to 6 of those. So all of these things are strategic and they save money. And one of the big processes that we're going through is the ERP, our Enterprise Resource Planning System. That is the overall computer system for the entire government. Now, this process has been going on for over a year, and it'll take a little, maybe a few years before we implement it, but the system is comprehensive enough that over the long run, the work processes and the operations of that system will allow this government to save monies for years to come, and it should pay for itself in a number of years. And of course, we're very familiar with the cuts that we had from employees. And just from 2009 to 2012, we cut our staff by 12%, and we are still providing the services that are done well, and we're not missing a beat. So we've done a significant amount of reduction in that area, and we are always lauded from regulatory agencies and others on our strong financial management processes, again, referencing the award-winning budget department. And just to give you an idea of how efficient we are, right now we are projected to be under budget for the general fund about $12.5 million in 2013. So very careful planning and watching the budget. And from an all funds perspective, we're looking at almost a $73 million savings based on our budgeting. So those are some of the efficiencies and how we're able to maintain our strong financial position. So I'm just going to hit on some of the revenue sources. I did some preliminary research, and a couple of sources, the Plain Dealer, the Northeast Ohio Real Estate Source, all have said that real estate prices are up 10%. So the property value should have a corresponding increase as we go over the years. As you all know, we had a situation where we lowered our property values, but based on the trends and the key indicators in the real estate market, we're targeted to go up. So we anticipate that over the next couple of years, our property values will get back to where they were, or either even stronger values. Our unemployment is down. Last fall, we were at 8%. Right now, we're at about 7.2%. And we have a continuous trend of sales tax being up. So the revenues are starting to get stronger. We're continuing with the efficiencies. And then we also had a slight uptick in our investment income. And there's one other area that we've talked about in other sessions, and that's the whole hotel industry. And one of the things that came up, and it was actually a featured news story this morning, is that we have a great deal of new hotels coming in our area. We have the Aloft that's in the Flats. There's also one being built in Beechwood. Both of those about 150 rooms. We have the Hilton that we're all very aware of at 650 rooms. The Westin at 484 rooms. The Drury, where the Cleveland Metropolitan School District is, at 180 rooms. There's a Le Meridian, not familiar with that, but 206 rooms. Crown Plaza, where the Cleveland Athletic Club is coming or leaving, 200 rooms. So that's a huge impact, not only from the hotel motel tax, but from the tourism perspective. And I will tell you, maybe 10 years ago, I was involved in a consortium that was looking to purchase or bring a hotel to this area, and there were no takers. But all of a sudden, we have a trend where we have major entities coming into our area willing to open hotels. So again, the economic indicators for our region are moving along. And then, of course, one of the great things downtown is the CSU $500 million expansion that they're working on. And I tracked at least $10 billion worth of investment in our county. So these items are going to help our economy grow. So it's very important that we strategically continue to budget and handle our finances the way we do. The last thing that I'm going to touch on is the investments that we as a county have invested in. The first one is the Western Reserve Fund with the $100 million fund, as it's also known. So far, this program has leveraged dollars and made some great impact and brought over 1,000 jobs into our region. We also have the infrastructure investment program that we're putting in place that's going to help our cities to build infrastructure projects that they may not have had the opportunity to build. We have the college savings account program. And I know that some people say that $100 is not a major investment, but I understand the dynamic of having a child who never thought about college talking about that at a young age. That will impact our community for years to come, and that is one of the strategic investments that will help build our revenues. And of course, the strategic approach with the casino revenues, and of course, our Global Health Innovation Center. So these are some of the things that will impact our budget, impact our region, and impact our revenues for years to come. So with the focus and strength of the revenues that will come from all of this that I've talked to you about, I just wanted to present all of this so that we could work together in this budget process and make sure that we have a strong budget as usual and move forward strategically. And with that, I will bring up Mr. Rubino. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And Director Rubino.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Matt Rubino, Office of Budget and Management. I was going to go through just some high-level summary points of the recommended budget. You do have a two-page handout. One is the basic presentation of the recommended budget for the next biennium, and I'll go back to that. And then I have some information on, because it was requested, I have some information on general fund revenue sources by major source, and I can just kind of talk about how the factors that Mark talked about feed into our estimates, our assumptions for revenue. But I won't go too far into detail because we have another presentation tomorrow. I did have two questions, Mr. Chairman. I can't remember if there's going to be a committee meeting on Halloween or not, because I was late for trick or treat 2 years ago. I'd rather not do that on the 31st, but I don't think there was.
We do not have a
Okay.
meeting for that day.
I'm not trick or treating, my son is, just to clarify that. And then you mentioned rounds of questions. Are we limiting the number of rounds, or are we just going to keep going until Councilman Greenspan is out of questions?
We're going to keep going until all the questions
Okay.
have been responded
Very
to.
well. And then one last thing, we will be
If
providing.
Councilman Greenspan has 30 questions, that's 10 rounds.
Okay, that's less than normal. You will be having the full budget document presented or provided tomorrow, and we do have departmental sections. So every departmental budget will have an individual write-up. So we're not going to go into heavy detail by department tomorrow, but you're going to have that opportunity, obviously, with the hearings, but also with written narrative and numbers specific to each county agency. And we've talked to all of them. They're 100% pleased with the recommended budget, so it should be a very short process. It's budget humor. Okay.
Director,
Yes.
for tomorrow, I would like you to give some department by department presentation on a high level.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
We'll do like by program type grouping. So we'll talk about justice and public safety as a group. We'll talk about human services, and then maybe hit some key points. But obviously, I know they'll come in with more specific information and questions. But yeah, we will do that high level
Okay,
overview.
fine.
Yeah, before I get into the overview, there was an interesting question from Councilman Jones about targeted recommendations or targeted cuts to Health and Human Service program budgets, and the number 25 million came up. I just want to clarify that our job is, we don't get paid to dwell on problems. We're here to think about solutions. So we provided options and discussion points for the administration several months ago. And yeah, there was a ballpark estimate. Here are the different things that you could mix and match or in combination utilize to balance the Health and Human Service budget in absence of new revenue. Now we know we have that replacement levy on the ballot. So we're waiting for that outcome. But again, we want to provide some alternatives or options for the administration, for council when we present this budget tomorrow. So yes, there will be reductions in both 14 and 15 and in 16 in the current recommended budget. But we know, and it's clarified in the narrative, we know that's assuming no new revenue. So we have some time here to wait for the election. County has a very good track record of approving health and human service levies. So when that does occur, we're going to have some opportunity, the county, the administration, and the council, jointly to make some decisions. Do we want to return to sort of the status quo of how we've allocated levy dollars program by program? Do we have some opportunities now to think about, hey, here's some things that maybe we don't need to prioritize as much, and there's some things that maybe need additional funding or additional priority placed on them. So if the levy passes, that gives us a lot of, much more flexibility than we've had in quite a few years to undertake that process. So I think that's what we want to explain how we're presenting a balanced budget for levy, because we are presenting a balanced budget, and we'll explain with the understanding that we'll make that explanation and describe how we assume we can balance without new revenue over the biennium, knowing that really a lot of the work is going to have to take place after the election, when and if the levy passes. And I think we have a pretty good chance that we'll be seeing passage of that replacement levy based on what we've seen in previous election cycles.
And do you go back and, Mr. Chairman?
The process, if we could, we would like to have the director complete his presentation before we open the questions, if that's okay. Director.
Thank you. If you'd like, we can turn to the two-page handout. First page is our basic summary of the recommended budget, the proposed operating plan or financial plan for the county. And this is similar in format to what you've seen before in both our quarterly reporting and our recommended budget reporting. And the table is 4 columns across. We have a first column for general fund, the Health and Human Services levy fund, so that's the utilization of those levy dollars. Then we combine the two. We have a past practice or a current practice of looking at both the general fund and levy combined in the all fund summary. And then we have the top half, excuse me, is the 2014 recommended budget, high level. And then the second half would be 2015, and then we just sum those up across the 2 years for the biennium. So for general fund, over the 2-year period, we have a recommended budget of $751 million. As you can see from over on the top left, the proposed operating budget for general fund is $373.4 million. And if you drop down For 2015, total expenditures and uses, it's 376. So pretty much a flat budget for the biennium. In comparison to the current approved budget for 13, we're about $13 million less in the proposed 14 expenditure levels than we are right now. And I expected to see that because part of the increase to the general fund, if you recall, is we consolidated the county's IT budget in the general fund this year. It was the first year. And a lot of that consolidation involved rounding up all these disparate budget line items for contracts in particular. They're spread across county agencies and bringing them in to this budget structure. So as we bring those in this year, you saw that current budget kind of inflate a little bit. And now we're knocking it back down. Now that we have consolidated budgetary structure, when you go into 14, we're going to be appropriating less dollars in the current year because of that consolidation. So that's one reason why you see that drop. Plus, we've also, as we'll go into detail tomorrow, for the general fund, for executive agencies in particular, we did make a good amount of targeted reductions or recommendations for targeted reductions across county executive programs to have a general fund impact. And we'll go more into those tomorrow. So we're ending 2014 with a fund reserve level of 27% of current expenditures. I'm sorry, 30.7% for 14, 27% for 15. And you have the roll-up reports also, but for 2016, the anticipated level reserve, factoring in reservations on the balance, is still over 25% based on this recommended budget for general fund. Health and Human Services levy fund. Again, to clarify, we are presenting a balanced budget, meaning we're looking at, when I say balanced, we're going to draw down on levy reserves in this proposed plan temporarily. We're going to draw on cash resources in the public assistance funds. We're maximizing those dollars that are there. And we're also making some degree of reductions to program budgets in both 14 and 15. It's not 25 million. It's more like 6 million in 14, and I think just over 10 million in 15 proposed. Again, still waiting for the outcome of that election, so that is going to change. But for now, we wanted to present a budget that's in balance with anticipated current year resources plus what we know we have on hand, and staying within the county's codified policy ordinance of 10% levy reserve. So if you look on this summary page, we have a 10% balanced expenditure rate in both 14 and 15. We assume flat revenue for property taxes. I know there is a 3-year appraisal process that will take place in, I guess, 15. We left levy revenue flat for right now. There's some ups and downs. We had a delinquent tax sale that we'll be collecting on next year. That's in the numbers. This year we had some one-time revenue. We transferred back some dollars in the levy fund. So you see little ups and downs. But right now we've assumed flat property tax revenue in the levy fund pending the outcome of the election on November 5th. Combined general fund is the levy and general fund. We just provide that again to demonstrate what those two sources or those two funding sources look like together. The levy fund is there to provide funding in addition to what the general fund could provide for health and human services in the absence of those voted levies. So that's why we combine them. And then all funds is just that. It's all county operating budgets. This does not include ongoing grants and capital projects. This is the 14 and 15 proposed all funds operating. So it's things like road and bridge. It's the health, the hospitalization self-insurance fund. It's workers' compensation fund. It's all the public assistance operating funds, the sanitary sewer system operating budget. So everything else that the county does, they regroup in these other things we call funds, which are just separate budget entities, are in that all funds number. The all funds budget is actually 54 million less than the current approved 2013 budget. So a slight drop, about a 4% drop from 13 approved, or 13 current approved to what we are proposing for 14 for the all funds basis. So that's the summary, the basic summary. We'll have more information tomorrow when we do an overview of the budget, how we did development, how it looks by broad functional or programmatic areas. We'll cover some of the points, some of the things we've come back to during quarterly reporting, iterations, and also past budget development we'll also touch on or update on. So that's why I don't have a lot today, but we will cover that and maybe cover some of it today during the questions. The second page is really just provided just a little advance presentation of the general fund revenue. The levy fund revenue, it's flat. It's $203 million per year, so there's not much to see. General fund is more dynamic because we have obviously a larger variety of funding sources that come into the general fund, the county's main pool of operating dollars. So this is actually a more interesting picture. And a lot of the things that Mark was talking about have an impact on how we assume that these sources to the general fund, how these revenue sources will change from 13, 14 and onward. So some of it is looking at what are current trends in the local economy, what does it look like? How do we think that should temper our assumptions or our estimates for the budget? And it feeds directly into how we do budget. And I want to take one step back. We've talked about this before in committee, maybe even in the regular meetings. Because we're always doing a monthly and a quarterly assessment of where we are for both the current year and the future years, we use that information to help build or as a springboard into this process. So we wrapped up second quarter and we had estimates for you for both 13 and 14 for general fund. But we go back and take another look a month later and we use any updates we have on assumptions and trends, and we actually are able to update in a live fashion the proposed revenue numbers for this biennium. So they're not stagnant by any means. We've actually made changes in the past few months just to our outlook on revenue. So I just want to cover a few of the main areas that may be of interest as far as general fund revenue sources. I want to start with local government fund. As we're all aware, in the previous state biennium, localities had funding reduced by 50%. The 50% was phased in beginning the second half of 11, went into full effect. The full 50% impact is this year, actually. So we have that as a baseline now. That's permanent. It's most likely not coming back in the near future. So we've lived with that. The county has adapted to that major source being cut by almost 17 million, a little bit more actually, going to next year. County's been able to adapt to that lower, really mainstay of revenue for localities. There's some counties and cities that took a much harder hit than we did. But because we have flexibility in the way we plan for budget and programmatically, we're able to adapt to that change. We knew it was coming, obviously. We've also benefited from fairly strong recovery in sales tax dollars. And the county's been very active reviewing county budgets, county programmatic budgets, whether they're general fund impact or otherwise. Again, that goes back to that, not just budget development itself, not this process that we kick off in the fall, but when we jump into first quarter and start taking our ongoing reviews, that helps feed that process and provides that flexibility that we've been cited for time and time again by the rating agencies. So local government fund is going to come in at just over 17 million this year. If things had remained the same at the state level as far as tax policy is concerned, we would assume maybe 18 million in local government fund for next year. But the state did make changes to tax policy. And the impact to counties and cities of those changes in tax policy mean this: there are less tax dollars being collected by the state for a variety. There's probably 3 or 4 major provisions, which means there are less tax dollars that flow into what's called the undivided local government fund. And that's the main pool of dollars that the state then distributes to counties and cities. So it looked like we were going to be held pretty even when the budget was passed, but then about a month or 2 later, Department of Taxation notified all localities, hey, the estimates we gave you were incorrect. We didn't have all the impacts of the biennial budget in the numbers. So they actually reduced everyone by about 4% based on what they expect those impacts of that policy to be when it comes to taxation at the state level. So instead of 18 plus million, we're actually anticipating about 16.8 million in local government fund. So another cut of about 600,000 or 700,000 to the counties and cities. Everyone's pretty much affected the same way, even though the formula was lifted. So now what we can depend on is if policy remains at that baseline, what will help us is if tax revenue statewide continues to grow, because that will continue to flow in. Yes, they're bringing less in, but if that amount of tax dollars is growing at 1%, 1.5%, that will help us. Just the baseline was lowered when this current biennial budget went into effect at the state. So that's something to keep in mind. So it wasn't advertised as a cut to local government fund, but it really is. That's how it manifests itself. It manifests itself as less dollars to devote to this fund to then allocate out to cities and counties. So we'll creep back up to 17 million by 2015 and beyond. We're assuming state tax revenue could grow at a 1.5% clip. So state income tax, state sales tax, and the other sources of tax revenue that flow into that fund. Sales tax, another important one. It's the second one from the bottom. We have had actually a pretty good third quarter looking at, and beginning of the fourth quarter for sales tax collections. We get a distribution from the state. The state administers sales tax, even though it's collected locally. The state does all the administration of the distribution of those tax dollars. The budget, I think, that we adopted for 13 assumed, I think, just over a 3% increase. Right now, we're looking like we're going to be between 3.7, maybe 3.8% when the year ends. We've had some interesting numbers the past few months. Some of it's timing, but even when you factor the timing, monthly collections compared to last year at this time are still trending over 3.5% over the same period. Now, I have my theories on why that is. I know there's a lot of projects going on. There's a multiplier when you have construction and other things going on in the area. The state sales tax base was expanded in 2010 to include some additional Medicaid spending for managed Medicaid care organizations. And I know that type of expenditure has a higher level of inflationary growth than normal stuff. So I think that's also propping that number up. And we're also starting to see median inflation is starting to creep up a little bit. It's still historically low. But when you look at the inflation adjusted numbers even, we're still outperforming the previous year, even when you factor in inflation. So there's something to this increase. It's not just nominal or related to an increase in prices. It's actual, I think, multiplier for what's been going on. So hopefully we can keep going into 14 and 15 with some level of growth. I'm actually surprised how well it's kept up. Usually you get a year or two where you creep back up or recover back up from recession and it levels off. We've continued to show pretty strong numbers month by month for sales tax, which is good. So we're assuming a 2.8% growth in 14 over last year. I think it's fairly conservative. We do touch base with our peer counties and see what they think. A lot of them are coming in the 2 to 3% range, I think, depending on their region of the state. But it's about maybe a percent drop in growth, but it's still growth from this year. So I think it's conservative, but it's realistic, and it doesn't, I think, overly communicate expectations of sales tax. And then we're looking at tapering down that growth, but maintaining some level of growth through 15 and 16, 2.25% in 15. And I think we go down to 1.75 assumption in 2016. But the idea is continued growth, a little bit of tapering or moderation of that growth in future years based on what we've seen in the past. But nonetheless, we still expect growth over the next biennium for sure. Property taxes for general fund will remain flat. Now you will notice in 14, that's the top line number, 13.8 million of property tax revenue for the general fund. Remember, we're splitting what's called the inside millage between general fund operations and the county's debt service fund. So based on what our debt service requirement is for the year, we're shifting those dollars first for debt service, and whatever's left over is for operations. So for this coming year, 2014, we're keeping that split, 0.6 mils for general fund, 0.85 mils for debt service. And then in 15, you'll see that drop. We go from 13.8 down to 9.6. And that's not a loss in revenue to the county. That's an additional shift over to debt service fund. And we talked about this before. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it has to do with timing and the availability of resources in the debt service fund. We spend those down first before we shift over new property tax revenue dollars. That's why you're seeing that shift in 15. Charges for services, we're showing, I think, a decent amount of growth really in a few areas. What we've seen over last year and especially this year, charges for services related to real estate transactions have been growing. They're still much lower than the peak 5 or 6 years ago, but notheless, depending on the type of real estate fee, they're in the 5 to 6% growth rate or range right now. So we're basically carrying that into the future. We're saying we'll probably continue to see increased revenue from real estate transaction fees of about 5% for the next few years, and we carry that through the numbers. The other thing to be aware of, in even numbered years, we receive about a $2 or $2.5 million influx of reimbursement dollars related to the elections that are held in odd number years. So for example, there's a local election this year. There's a city election, City of Cleveland and other cities have an election. Board of Elections will get reimbursed from those municipalities, and those dollars will settle through to the county the beginning of next year. So in 14 and 16, you see that charge number kind of bounces up compared to 15, and that's the main reason. But we're still keeping that assumption of growth in real estate transaction fees, steady through the biennium into 2016. Fines and forfeitures, mostly related to court fees. We have a little bit of a bump related to what we think should be improved collection going forward. Intergovernmental, mostly unchanged with one exception. This was actually a positive outcome of the current state budget. The reimbursement rate for public defender at counties was increased from 35% to 40%. So it's about a $500,000 increase to general fund revenue from that policy change that we're reflecting in those intergovernmental numbers on the sheet. Those are the items of note. Other tax would be lodging tax. And there is a marked increase from 13 to 14. Part of that is anticipated growth. We've seen 6 and 7% growth in hotel tax. We also have an artificial bump up. Part of the Medical Mart funding, we're now a global center funding model, included Positively Cleveland making a contribution of their bed tax dollars on an annual basis. This year it's $500,000. Next year it jumps to $1 million. So a big portion of that increase from 13 to 14 in those numbers is related to that expected increase of contribution from Positively Cleveland to the county going up from $500,000 to $1 million. So that's why you see the increase from 13 to 14. All in all, right now we're assuming about a 3% growth in general fund revenue available for general fund operations. A chunk of that is devoted to funding debt service and operating payments for the global center. So it doesn't all come into just general fund, but we do capture it in our top line numbers because it does flow into the general fund. And then we have basically revenue holding flat with increases. Really, sales tax is driving the increase in 15 and 16. And other things, for the most part, remaining steady. I would call it stable. So revenue outlook, I'll give it a B+. I think it's fairly good compared to where we were 5 years ago. And this area in particular, compared to Franklin County or Hamilton, I think just from my observations has been more resilient than those two counties. If you look at Franklin County, the commissioners are going to be approving a sales tax increase, one for some major capital improvements, but also to help buoy the general fund for the next few years. Hamilton County's had to make some fairly significant cuts to very critical programs, including their county jail, their county medical examiner's office, administrative positions. We've done a lot of that trimming also, but we've been able to take a more measured and thoughtful approach. They're basically cutting to save their lives. It's tapered off a little bit, but those counties did have a couple of rough years compared to what we've seen in Cuyahoga County. So it's something interesting to note when it comes to resources available to the general fund. That's what I have.
Great. Thank you very much for that overview. We'll now open the round of questionings, 3 questions at a time, starting with Councilman Greenspan.
Okay, thank you. My first question has 27 parts. My second question has 3, and my third has 18. In looking at the, well, let me ask you this, if this can't count as my question. The 2013 OBM third quarter projection, is that the roll-up?
That be what?
The third quarter roll-up, we haven't seen that yet.
We combine, that's a good question, actually, Councilman. For this roll-up report, we're combining the third quarter overview in these reports. So that column right in the middle of those roll-up reports, that is the third quarter projection. So we're not doing a separate roll, because what happens is now that we've changed over, we're in budget mode. Instead of projecting 14 and 15, we're planning 14 and 15. So remember, 14 helps feed budget. So now you'll see one set of reports that gives you your prior year, your current budget, your most up-to-date quarterly projection, and then your budget years 14 through 16.
Okay, all right. Then if I'm looking at the third quarter projection number, it appears that there is no more anticipated expenditures for economic development, other strategic initiatives, and so forth, that under the reserve of available balance, that we're only going to initiate the items that are highlighted. Is that correct?
Right, these are the reserves we're carrying in the
Right.
recommended budget.
right? So
We're resetting for the next biennium. So this report's a bit of a hybrid. We're trying to give you some third quarter projection information, although I think second quarter captured all the major changes and trends. So we're giving you some of that, but also everything you see is what we're proposing to go forward for 2014-15 biennium.
So there is no Q4 ED. The ED reserve will not be, there will be there are no expected
We shifted it over to the budget column. So if you look to the next column, we have it shifted over. We've shifted some of the
to
items.
2014, but in 2013, there's no more planned ED expenditures than what's already.
There are, but they would be contained within the Western Reserve Fund program budget. So I think right now they're anticipating possibly having loans funded of about 15 million this year. So remember, what we're showing down there is the impact of when we go to capitalize that fund with economic development bonds, we're showing what the impact is. So now it's lower because we're in the budget that you'll see in the roll-ups. We're flowing in now the first round of borrowing, about 15 million. So we have debt service already in the operating lines now in the proposed budget. And the difference is that 6.6 million that we're carrying into 14.
But part of that 15 million is also brownfield and other dollars, correct?
Correct. So
Right.
we're taking that into assumptions. Right now, we're working with development. Before we even have to borrow new money, we think there could be between 5 and 6 million of additional dollars that the county has right now on hand that we can continue to use to fund loan projects. So we're only going to capitalize with financing what we need after we've used up those resources.
I guess where I'm going, it appears that we have reduced from the 2013 current budget, the second column to the third column, to enhance the reserve number from 26.3 to 37.3, a reduction in the reserve
Well, it's
spending.
split now. Now I'm showing debt service of 1.4 million. So the difference, 1.4 million, is now in the debt service line because we're planning to actually start issuing bonds. So I have, the 8 million number was the starting point. I now have 1.4 million showing up in the operating expenses. It was not there in the projection. We now have flowed into the budget numbers the first round, which is about 1.4 million a year in debt service. That'll support about 15 million in borrowing in the operating line. The difference, 6.6, is still in the balance as a reserve, or taken from the balance as a reserve. As we continue to increase how much we think we'll need to support, use general fund dollars to support additional borrowing, we'll continue to increase the budget for debt service and decrease the reserve. So it's in there in two places now.
So I guess where I'm going, maybe I'm not answering the question correctly. Our demand on reserves is $22 million less between what the budget, column 2 and column 3, as a result of either spending the money, as a result of deferring to future periods. If you subtract the 52 from the 29.
Well, you have to add in the 25.5 that's in the 14 column. I'm showing them split between columns.
I understand. I'm trying to understand how our reserves increased from the original budget to now, and it's because we're deferring spending from one year to the next or not.
Well, no,
spending.
we're budgeting in the future. Remember, I want to show what the plan is for 14. So the only thing we're leaving in 13 column would be the current year Global Center Reserve, the Whiskey Island Purchase Reserve, which goes away next year, or after next year, the 27th payroll, and then the carryover always stays in the current year. That's just contractual obligation dollars that have a reserve within programmatic budget. So it's all in there, but now you want to see it kind of split. I'm planning for 14, so I want to show you, here's what we have planned for these reserves that you've seen before for 14. I could keep them in the 13 column, but so I kind of go back and forth. I think it's better to show, hey, here's what we plan on reserving in some of these other items for 14. So for example, Gateway, it was 3.3 million for 13. What I'm showing you now is which is the final year, actually next year, the 3.4 million is the last year of that guarantee. So I want to show you the new amount, not the old amount, which is over in the budget column. And I have that now in the 14 column. So I'm giving you a preview of what those budgeted reserves will be in 14.
Tomorrow will be the voting on the college savings plan. Should it pass, it's about 2.1 million, just rounding up. Is that contemplated in this?
Yes,
in this
it's
report?
projected in 13 and also in the 14, 15.
And where is it in 13? Where is it then?
It would be in the social services line of the roll-up, but if you go to Schedule 2 of the roll-up, you'll see a line the general fund departmental summary report has a line item for the college savings account budget.
All right, I'll take a look at it there. And then my last question on this round is, in the future, we know that there's going to have to be money for the TI in the new administration building. Where is that money projected to
That'd
come
be future debt issuance. So it's going to be treated like a capital project. And when you see the recommended budget plan, we have a CIP section. And in the buildings infrastructure piece of that CIP, you'll see all the individual projects, and that tenant improvement project is in that capital plan. And the county has about a 3-year cycle for doing long-term financing. So the next planned issuance of capital improvement debt is scheduled for late 2015. So that project would be part of the group of things we want to finance with long-term financing.
But the cash for that is coming out of what and when?
The cash for
We're going to have to pay for it. The bills are going to come due as the furniture and the TI is.
It's going to be a combination of two sources, Councilman. One is the tenant improvement allowance,
Right.
the 10 million. I think we spend those dollars first. The rest would be proceeds from the financing. So we'll probably, in the past, we've utilized short-term financing. We do a note and then roll the note into a bond in 15. So it's probably the type of strategy we'll use, not just for this project, but for the other building projects that are planned for next year in 2015.
So we won't be using our internal funds. We're going
No,
to borrow.
we would use sources of financing.
So a loan to a bond.
Correct. It's called a bond anticipation note. It's a 1-year short-term borrowing. Counties utilize this dozens of times. Go out, borrow for 1 year, fund the current cost you think you'll have, and then when you're ready to actually issue bonds, you bond out the remaining project expenditures plus whatever you've spent. And you're not dipping into the general fund to pay for those project costs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Council President Connolly.
I'll defer my questions to Mr. Greenspan unless you want to move along. I might pass.
Councilman Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned at some point that projections that you got from the Department of Taxation by the state were revised.
Yes.
When did you find out? When did that happen?
Well, Councilman, they send us what's called a certification letter to the Budget Commission, who works with us in fiscal. And I believe the deadline may have been end of August or early September. So that went out, and the numbers were pretty flat, close to what we expected. And then, without really any formal notification to counties, people really found out by, I think via email across different counties, the Department of Taxation is revising the numbers, and they'll be sending out a new certification. I think that went out probably the end of September. I can double check, but there was no advanced warning. I think there's people in fiscal office follow a county auditor association listserv email, and that people started talking about it via email. And you went to the DOT website, and there were the new projections. So they ended up being just over 4% adjustment across the board for all localities when they factored in the impact of the changes to the state tax law. They were doing what they could. They have, I think, a pretty hard set date per ORC to get the original certifications out. So they did that. Now, they didn't preface those with, hey, these are going to be changing, but they did get the estimates out by the due date, but they did have to revise those estimates once they were done updating the impacts of the approved biennial budget of the state.
Well, as a follow-up to that, have you seen that happen before?
I have not, Councilman, but it's probably happened before. I couldn't tell you when. I can do some follow-up talk to Budget Commission.
I'm just
They're usually pretty
curious. I don't want
regimented.
to draw this out. It seems that we are, in a position, but I can only assume that some of the other 87 counties might have found this to be a little more inconvenient.
It was very inconvenient for most of the counties that we were communicating with via email. Unexpected. I can see why it would have an impact, but I guess it was interesting that wasn't communicated when they sent out the original set of numbers, just prefacing those with, these are going to change, but as far as I know, that was
sort of
not.
reminds me of in tandem, the fact that the state is not going to subsidize levies, the 12.5% that had been traditionally subsidized, levies had been traditionally subsidized, was sort of, carpet was sort of pulled out from under everybody all over the state who were well on their way to seeking levies and making plans to do that.
Correct, and there was, the change was inserted abruptly before passage, but also the interpretation of the impact was probably...
It was kind of fuzzy, wasn't
Well, it
it?
was communicated differently at least 2 times before we had finality to what the actual impact or expectation would be for any county or locality putting a levy on it. So I believe the first communication that came out was a little different than what actually ended up being the case for how those impacts...
Well, I get a lot of questions on that, quite obviously.
Yes.
And, I find it pretty awkward to try to explain to people that something like that could happen at such a late date. Anyway, the other question I had is sort of, I don't know if you're the right person but here's what I'm trying to find my way through. There is an expectation that property values are going to rise, at some point in the future. We do what the mid appraisal.
Yeah.
What do you call that?
It's a three-year update.
The one in the middle. So that's in 15.
Correct.
So that would be the first point when we would actually. I mean, you could see trends. You could
Sure.
You could do an analysis, but that would be the first time that we would actually have documented information that might affect the level of taxation.
That would be the first time we have a significant update. Every year, because of the board revision process, there are updates, plus there's new construction going on. So the assessed valuation does change from year to year, but we expect to see more major changes every 3 years, and then, of course, during the 6
But
years.
across
So-
the board,
Yes.
what I'm trying to get at is if property values rise somewhat, I don't know, I have no idea how much, but if there's some rise in property evaluations, when would that impact what we actually would be bringing in through our levies?
Well, for the voted levies, we're going to be capped at what the approved amount and rate
All
are.
right, so they're capped, so
yeah,
the
they're
one that's
capped.
on the ballot now would be capped for the
Correct.
5 years, and
Yes.
then the other one is capped, so not until the one that's up in, what, 2016?
2016, correct.
And so it would be would be something we'd be dealing with in a budget for 2000, in our budget hearings
It could be.
4 years from now in 2017?
It could be,
that,
yes.
It's that far
Yes,
forward,
I think so.
it's quite a
You
ways,
just see
quite a
small-
ways off.
Yeah, small changes here and there in total valuation or assessed valuation for the county. I
Okay.
think what's more important, actually, that's, the assessed valuation is very important, but also looking at the collection trend. And a bit of good news is that last year, I think our combined collection rate across the county, because that's what's of interest to us, being county government, I think last year we were just under 95%. So if you add the current collection rate, which was just under 91% plus delinquencies, we came in a hair under 95%. This year, it looks like we're going to finish at 96% or close to 96%. So we're seeing an uptick, and that was not just because of an increase in collecting delinquent taxes. It's also the current rate did go up at least a half percentage point. And that makes a big difference. So
There's a question-
especially with the levies.
Yeah.
You're capped, but if collection trends increase, that helps. You will see more revenue because of increased collection trends.
Okay. The question came up when we were debating the issue months ago about whether it was possible to build in the ability to adjust property taxes so that they wouldn't just rise without a vote of the people. And what we think we found out was that's not the case.
Yeah, you're pretty much hemmed in by what's known as House Bill 920 when it comes to effective millage, from what I understand.
Well, the last question for me this round is, and I think the answer to this is no, but maybe it's not. The expectation of the sin tax extension next year if that happens, or if it doesn't happen, does that have, what kind of an impact would that possibly have or not have on our budget?
For the sin tax, because those dollars are not flowing right now, do not flow through the county's operating budget. They're used to support debt that was issued to construct Gateway, which is the arena in the ballpark. Was extended to finance or help fund the financing of Cleveland Browns Stadium. And we also have, well, that's lodging tax. So that's those three venues. That's really, if we're looking at those public assets, that's the importance of the excise tax is what would be the future of being able to maintain and improve those public assets, the ballpark, the arena, and now Cleveland Browns Stadium. Now the city does have a capital reserve fund, but I think they probably will need to have additional funding to get the stadium to where it should be and keep it operational and very good and in modern condition for the next 20 years.
Well, I just know that as it turns out, it's this council that has to put that has to vote on that extension, and it takes 8 votes for that to occur. So that's something that we're going to be having to take a look at, and so I don't want to get into it today, but I want to sort of indicate, if people haven't thought about it, that it's out there.
It is.
And what would be the if the sin tax was not expanded, if there weren't 8 votes on the council to do that, where would the burden fall?
Well, it would definitely be in the arena of the county and the city, most likely. You still would have the need. There's still going to be a need to make improvements to all 3 venues. So the question is, well, who's responsible? The county has responsibility, especially when it comes to the arena, and at this point, the ballpark. The stadium is in the city's hands, but the idea is that the sin tax can be extended. Now you have a revenue source to take care of all 3 venues over the next few decades, actually. So if we're not able to have excise tax extended, then there's going to be some additional thinking that has to be done on the county and city's part, because I think the need will still be there, and the greater region too, that there's potential for other dollars, private dollars, or some other sort of financing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Gallagher. I'm going to pass until the end and move to Councilwoman Conwell.
I just have one question during this round through the chair to Director Rubino. The options that you talked about, will you present the options per each department or as a whole? The options that you gave?
Correct. We'll present them. They'll be explained in the actual budget plan document. We'll provide some high-level detail of the types of reductions that we recommended for levy fund.
But will that be per department or programs or
It'll be, I
as a
think,
whole?
higher level. We'll get more programmatic in nature or type of reduction,
Okay.
rather than line by line for each department, and then you get into the departmental details during the hearings. And again, it'll be documented in the actual departmental summary section of the recommended budget plan.
Thank you.
Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For several years, I served on the boards of local credit unions, several boards actually, and the credit unions played I think, a critical role in raising financial literacy in the community, especially in the face of the foreclosure crisis, where lack of financial literacy was part of the problem. I say all of that to say, today we in Board of Controls gave money for investment advisory board for consultation services for our investment earnings. And my question to you is it possible or legal to have our investment earnings deposited in local banks or in local credit unions? Are those legal options?
Well, I should probably defer this question to the treasurer, but I can tell you the county has, per its policy, has pretty stringent collateral requirements, which would exclude all small institutions, whether it's a credit union or a small bank. That's something that may change, in the near future, but right now we have a hard, fast policy, fairly significant collateralization. I think it's 105? 105% collateralization on our holdings.
So even though they are federally FDIC insured and all monies are protected, it's still,
FDIC is not 105%. FDIC doesn't go to that level. The banks, the institutions have to be able to demonstrate on an ongoing basis how the county's holdings are collateralized and how they meet or exceed that policy requirement. So it's a wrinkle if you want to get smaller entities involved with the county invests. So that would require a change to the policy, and I believe there may be some tweak to Ohio Revised Code, but I'm not positive.
the next question is really just clarification for me on the subject we were discussing earlier, the $25 million. Is that over 1 year, multiple years? Kind of clarify that.
No, to
for
clarify, we were tasked with, hey, we need to present a balanced budget prior to the levy, the vote for the levy. So provide us options. Doesn't mean we'd implement every single one, but if we have to make reductions, which may be temporary, show us how we can get there, model how we can get there, minimize the impact on critical programs and mandated programs. So we provided basically a laundry list. Here are things you could do in combination. You don't have to do all of them, but you need to do some combination of them along with using reserves and cash in the PA fund. And I think our manifesto, our list of options totaled about 25 million, but we didn't recommend that all 25 million be utilized or recommended. It was just to give that flexibility and a dearth of alternatives when it came time to actually put together the final recommended budget for right now.
That was simply for 2014, 25 million in 20.
You could use that full amount in either year. Here, all things we've identified per year, a maximum of that much per year if you had to. Now, we don't need to, even with no new revenue, we wouldn't necessarily have to recommend that level of reductions in funding. But nonetheless, here are all these options. They happen to add up to that number. But we don't need to utilize that full number.
So assuming the levy passes, what happens to your calculations then? Do you still hold to those numbers or do you readjust them?
Well, that's a policy
redo them
question.
based-
The revenue will show anticipated revenue increasing because of levy passage, but now that becomes the work of the process between November 6th and December 10th. What choices does the county want to make policy-wise?
So what I'm hearing you say is you will present to us the budget that reflects the reductions or
Yes.
reflects the numbers based on not considering the levy dollars.
Correct. Knowing that it should be temporary as the levy passes, but showing everybody, let's demonstrate where we're at, no new revenue, flat line. And then the decision is what things do we restore, what things do we reallocate or reprioritize. So again, you have more flexibility. You also have continued ability to use this PA fund resources. We can decide how, rather than using them as a lifeboat for the next few years, perhaps we can entertain making investments, one-time investments within the system, whether it's for technology or other things that we're allowed to spend those dollars on to help augment what we can do with newfound revenue if the levy passes.
Do we know the dollar amount of what we expect to receive in the levy?
That's additional revenue of about, we'll call it 26.5 million.
26 and a half.
Yeah, it's close to 26, 27 million of new revenue.
So the 25, and is that 25 a hard number? 25?
It was an estimate for
Estimate.
potential reductions.
Okay.
In the 25 million, maybe the other, because there's two 25 millions probably we're discussing, we'd also identified a funding difference between current revenue and current levels of expenditure of the $25 million range. So different things going on. But the idea for this budget was to address funding imbalance within the levy fund for 14 and 15 with the assumption of no new revenue. Again, that assumption being temporary if the levy passes.
During this budget process, can you present to us, to make it simple for me, a list of what those $25 million cuts were so that I can see them clearly? And
Yes, just with understanding, we're not recommending the full 25. We recommended a small portion of those options. They were options, not actual recommendations to cut. It was a full list of options that you could employ in combination, but we're only recommending a subset of those for the approved.
Councilman Jones, I spoke to Director Warner this morning and asked him to prepare a list of actual Health and Human Services cuts that are in the budget as currently proposed, and he said he would do so. So we will have that information. Okay. Councilman Rogers.
I just have a question on the special revenue funds,
Yes.
and I'm wondering, do those balances carry over? Do the balances remain in those funds, and do they carry over into the next budget?
They carry over, Councilman. So whatever's not spent in any particular special revenue fund, that cash is available for the next year to be appropriated and spent, on top of current revenue that would be coming in for that year. So each year, take the, let's use the real estate assessment fund, for example, which funds Board of Revision in the appraisal process. And they have, turn to that page, a beginning balance of 7.7 million in 2014. And I'm on Schedule 6, but you don't have to, just to give you an illustration, we'll collect about 14 million on top of that money that's already sitting there. So we'll have 21 million in the current year. We're not going to spend it all in the same year, so whatever doesn't get spent, in this case, about 12.8 million, I'm sorry, 9 million would carry over into 2015.
Okay.
It would be appropriated along with current revenue, because every year you're receiving revenue in that fund, for example. And a lot of the special revenue funds work that way. They have some source of restricted use revenue that's coming in each year, appropriating the current revenue and potentially using resources available in that fund, depending on the type of fund it is.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Okay. Councilwoman Simon?
Just a quick question, and I think I know the answer already. I see that the fines and forfeitures went up significantly because of the real estate transactions. We've lost a lot of revenue because of the MERS conglomerate that denied us transaction fees for years. And I understand that the litigation is going in Geauga, and you might not be privy to this, but is there any discussion about anticipated revenues? I know we can't rely, or just, it's not part of this budget, but just as a broader question, if we're ever going to recoup that, any of it.
I've not been involved in those discussions. I can take a note. I know that maybe the clerk of courts could help address that. I don't know if that's been a discussion in the Public Safety Committee or not, but I've not been in any discussion on any, I guess, refined numbers on what we could expect if that were to happen.
Okay. I'm noting that we've lost a lot, and that's a place we potentially can gain, and maybe I'll meet with the law director on that and see what the status is of that.
Anything further? Okay. I have three quick questions, Director. The first is as to whether we're going to receive the full budget books before tomorrow's hearing.
Yes, Council. We'll bring them right before the committee meeting. I don't know how early we'll have them. Going to the printer tomorrow morning, but this quick turnaround. So,
but we'll at least
you'll
have
books.
them at the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
They'll still be warm.
Okay. Question number two is how much use of PA funds is baked into the projections for 2014 and 2015?
Turning the roll up, we're Councilman Miller. We're expecting or recommending to use $7 million in 2014 and $13.1 million in 2015.
Okay, and the final question is: when you testified earlier that there were reductions in the HHS budgets of $6 million in 2014 and about $10 million in 2015. My question is whether the $10 million in 2015 reflects the same $6 million that was done in 2014 plus $4 million more.
Correct.
Or whether it reflects $10 million in addition to the $6 million done in.
No, it's 6 and then 10, so we're adding 4 more on.
Four
so we're
more.
carrying the 6 or so into 14 and adding some additional recommendations. So it's not,
Okay.
I'm not understating the reduction.
Thank you. And now I would ask who on the committee has additional questions? Councilman Greenspan? And
But I'm going to try to,
any, I'm not seeing a lot, so we're going to dispense with the three-question rule at this point, and you can work to completion.
all right. Just looking on the general fund, looking ahead to 2016, in 2016, once again, making an assumption that the county-owned hotel moves forward, Mr. Parks made reference that there would be anticipated increased revenues as a result of that. However, in looking at that model, understanding that the debt service to the hotel project is made up of about $8 million in county taxes, the county bed portion of the bed tax, the increase in sales tax, and the non-school portion of the property taxes. Is that 8 million, and then the other 8 million for debt service is coming out of the projected profits of the hotel. I don't know how much of that is included in the 2016 number, but obviously there would be some debt service in 2016 related to the hotel should it move forward. Is that contemplated in these numbers? And the reason it's important is because if you go down to the bottom and you look at the reserve, we start getting real close to the 25% number. And if those taxes are included in this number and they need to be applied towards debt service, then it's really not going to be applicable.
They're actually captured in it for right now because we don't have a formal financing structure defined fully. In the bottom of the reserves, we've relabeled, it used to be called the Medical Mart Reserve. We now have it labeled Global Center Operating Reserve.
Right.
That's the capacity, and that's the capacity left in the model. So we take the 0.25% sales tax, the lodging tax, and then back out the county's annual payment of debt service and operating payments. If you read across that line, you can see we're capturing that excess revenue in that line. So we're backing out of the reserve until we know exactly how the financing structure is going to work. So those dollars, it's, for example, in 2014, it's 11.8 million.
Mm-hmm.
Conceivably could be available to fund debt service on that portion of the hotel. The revenue bonds would be something separate, but we will be issuing some sort, or doing some sort of financing that's tied to the remainder of the sales tax and bed tax. So it'd be shorter term because that expires in 2027. So we're capturing those dollars and setting them aside. So we're not overstating the balance because we've already backed them out. Now, will we use every single dollar towards that use? We may not have to. We may be devoting some of these to a capital reserve for the Global Center, the part that we're going to own eventually, or could own some years from now.
So what you're saying is that included in that 13, looking at 2016, the 13.3 is the $8 million of anticipated taxes to satisfy that portion of the debt service.
It's what we're currently collecting right now.
Right.
That we don't need because we've made ourselves whole for what our obligation is on the Global Center. We have excess capacity. It really goes back to the model that was conceived and put into place in 2010 was very conservative. We had, I think, no growth or little growth the first 5 years for sales tax. We've obviously done much better than the model. So we have this capacity. And that's part of the concept. That's not the whole thing. But one piece of the concept of the hotel is we have this additional capacity. Let's utilize it for the headquarters hotel since it's related to the MedMart or Global Center.
So this would represent that year's portion of the excess or
Yes.
the cumulative portion of the excess?
Now, again, will 100% be needed for the financing? Probably not, which means we'll have money to do. I think important thing would be capital reserve for the existing Global Center and also think about early amortization of the existing bonds on the MedMart.
So this is money left over in excess of the debt service
And operating payments, yes.
from the MedMart
From the
Convention
MedMart
Center.
project, correct.
Okay. And then just speaking of debt service, on Schedule 5, the debt service actually goes down from 82 million in 2013, 77 million in 2015. I don't know what.
We have some, we refinanced bonds. The 2004 GEO bonds are actually going to be fully refunded next year. It was an advanced refunding, so you'll see some debt service drop off. Now, important note, I guess, well, it's definitely covered in the narrative for the budget plan. We did not flow in debt service or expected debt service for the next bond issuance, which will be the first payment would be due in mid 2016. You won't see that in that number, but we've identified in the 5-year forecast, hey, we have 6 or 7 million in capacity, but we're going to need some portion of that for future financing for county projects, not the hotel, but for county infrastructure. So you'll see that debt service number go back up
In 2016.
for 2016.
Yeah, that's where I was
Yes.
going to go, because 2016 is not presented here. Since I'm still on back to Schedule 5, just curious, I noticed that the workforce development, we start to see between 2013 and 2015, almost $2.5 million decline.
Yeah, they've lost a lot of federal funding.
Is it federal? Okay.
Yes, yeah, they're almost fully federally funded.
Yeah, because there was a study that came out today that said Northeast Ohio, Cleveland Metro lost more jobs in the last 4 months in this country than any other region in the country. Cleveland being 80%, Cuyahoga County being 80% of that region. I would
Yes.
just maybe draw attention that
We are making up a part of that loss for this year. County did make a commitment of $1 million to help offset some of the loss for workforce training or worker training. But it's a federal funding issue.
And just moving down just the next couple points. The college savings account, once again, should have passed tomorrow, 1.95 in 2013, but then it drops. Why does it drop?
We have in the 13 number, there's some contractual expenses that will carry over into next year. So the amount that you will be considering tomorrow has dollars in there for, I think, some of the consulting and other stuff that are going to be encumbered and spent next year. So we don't need to appropriate new dollars since they'll have carryover obligation to use. So that contract could be 2 years worth of consulting or other support. So that's appropriation that carries over, plus requesting the additional dollars or the ongoing dollars for next year.
From a budgetary standpoint, those numbers do not include a reimbursement to the Health and Human Service funds that are using for staff to come over. You know, I think there are two folks who are funded out of the Health and Human Service levy.
I think they do. I think it should be the full impact to the general fund.
Okay, all right. We'll look at that, more of that. The next line, the employee health and wellness, I see it goes up almost $20 million from 13 to 15. Why?
Actually, good news, and it's going to sound counterintuitive. Right now, the 14 and 15 is an estimate. We anticipate growth. Right now, claims are tracking over 12% below the estimate. So we're showing 13 pretty low, but we're still building in growth or inflationary growth in 14 and 15. So that's the main reason for the jump. We're also incorporating fully in, 14, the Board of Developmental Disabilities is now in the regionalization program. So it's not all county health claims costs. We're bringing in a big pool of enrollees.
But we get reimbursed for that.
Yes, they're paying. Yes.
They're paying
so there's
for
money
it.
coming in and money going out.
Okay, but you just show the out.
Correct.
You don't net it here.
The good story is that we've been able to keep, we'll talk about this tomorrow, and it's in the write-up, but the anticipated claims cost and the budgetary impact for 14 is going to be flat because we have, the pool has performed very well. Much more savings or reduction in growth than we expected at the beginning of this year.
Okay. And the IT automation, I see it going away after 13.
That was part of the 12-13 biennium. So we're going to spend as much of the dollars as we can now. Whatever's left, we're going to pre-encumber or hold on to and let them continue spending it out next year. But the idea is we'll capture the full impact so you can see mainly that's going to be spent across this year next. And we're including the impact on the balance, the general fund balance. So we're not overstating on what's left in the total general fund balance.
I don't know if you're the right person to ask this, but is the IT automation process done then?
No, I think it's ongoing. I know Jeff Maury will speak to it during his presentation, but there's a lot of other things going on, equipment upgrades. I know they're looking at some other consolidation of maintenance and some other equipment purchases that will help the county in general, including getting rid of GroupWise.
And yeah, I just have one statement that's it. We just got this, so I haven't had a chance to study it, but Mr. Parks made a statement, and then there was a statement made during the State of the County when we talk about the staffing reductions, and the statement's always made back to a 2009 staffing number, which was pre-buyout, and was probably at the highest point of the county's one of the highest point at the county.
Yeah, the highest point was probably 2,000.
Okay, but why do we keep making reference to a period of time when we weren't even in existence?
Well, it's still part of the provenance of the county, Councilman. I mean, it's something to look at. We may not have been responsible, but when I'm looking at what am I trying to accomplish globally with budget reporting, well, I need to tell a story of the county, whether it was prior to having a charter form of government or after. We want to see, we don't want to lose that connection to what the county looked like 5 years from now, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not necessarily that by publishing the information, hey, we're taking credit for something, but no, here's what we used to look like. We've realigned, there's been continual improvement on the staffing levels of the county. So I think it's an important story to tell, regardless of whether it was under the commissioners or the executive and council. I think that's the main takeaway from that information.
Yeah, it just causes more questions when folks come up
Sure.
and say, well, you've lost X, you've reduced staff by 800, whatever the number is, from '09 to
Yes.
now, but a lot of that happened before we were even in office. So it does almost have the perception that we're trying to take credit.
Sure, but policy-wise, someone could have come in and said, I think I want to restore staffing levels back to where they were. And that decision hasn't been made. In fact, we're going in a different direction. We're looking across, especially within executive agencies, looking at what we need to accomplish on a day-to-day basis and what staff do we need, and the staff do we have, how are we deploying them, how are we classifying them, how are we compensating them fairly. So I think you were still handed this thing, you could have gone in a different direction, and we chose not to.
Okay. All right. That's all. Those are all the questions I have today.
Director, I have a few additional questions. One is getting back to those special revenue funds.
Yes.
It mentions the Veterans Services Fund, and it has a fund balance of 400 and some thousand. My understanding is that we're supposed to basically use all of those carried over funds.
correct.
Why is there $400,000 sitting there?
It's based on the projection for 2013. Our current estimate right now does not show a full spend of those dollars in 2013. So I think they're locked up in contracts, so it'll be carried over, and the cash will be carried over until it's spent. And then pursuant to the enabling legislation, once we know the result of 2013, fiscal office will inform council, hey, Veteran Services Commission underspent by X, and then we can appropriate what they underspent into the fund. So you'll see on top of the 400,000 or so that we're showing carrying over, we have additional monies going into that fund that can be appropriated for purposes within the program scope.
Okay, and my other question is, as opposed to property values increasing, if new projects come online that pay property tax, do we get any immediate revenue benefit from that, or does the cap prevent that as well from giving us additional revenue?
I believe we do not get additional revenue because we're looking at this total assessed valuation for both residential and commercial. So as that assessed valuation grows, whether it's from a new building being built or an appraisal on a piece of property going up, the state will change the effective rate on those levies based on how that total assessed valuation grows. So when you have a levy that's already tied to an approved amount and an assessed valuation, the way you're going to see growth in revenues through increased collection, better current collection trends. So the historic average has probably been in the 96.5%, 97%. The closer we inch up towards that historical average, the better we'll do, because it's more people paying an effective rate. So the effective rate's going to keep you in, but at least you have more people coming in. But you're always going to be capped, I believe, at the voter-approved amount.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues for today? Has anybody signed in for public comment unrelated to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chairman, no one has signed in.
We're gonna,
Mr. Chair, I would just like to say, I think tomorrow we should probably have a relatively speedy vote on this Hallie issue. We don't need to debate that anymore, so you'll have the entire period for your budget then.
I'm certainly not planning to debate it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think we should just vote tomorrow and whatever.
Yes, I think we had a good hearing today.
Yeah, so then you can proceed, you'll have a lot of time tomorrow.
Motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.